at no point has Nigel Farage laid out which bits are inaccurate. And actually, on Sunday, Robert Jenrick was on some broadcast airwaves and pretty much stood up most of the story, as he was asked questions. So, it'll still be asking that question will still be following him around during the campaign trail. And during a campaign trail, he's got to be pretty public.
Moppy has been in touch. Good afternoon, Jane. I've got a stupid question alert. And Moppy wants to know whether the investigation into Nigel Farage will continue. Now he has resigned as the MP for Clacton, but we do need to make clear that he's going to stand in the forthcoming by-election there. So Terry Stiatsny is with me, Ollie Cole with me too. Terry, what's the answer to that question?
It's not at all a stupid question. It's a very interesting question. And if he is no longer an MP, the investigation would most likely be suspended. But if he were to return as an MP, then it could continue. And even if he were no longer an MP, the Standards Commission can still investigate what somebody did while they were an MP. It's just that their powers to then have a punishment, obviously they can't then be suspended from their seat, for instance. But, the investigation could perfectly well still continue. And, of course, there are other investigations which MPs have reported and suggested there should be further investigations. And there was a bit of a hint there in Nigel Farage's speech that at least one of those has potentially been taken up. Now, we don't know that from the Standards Commissioner, but he said there's going to be another investigation, particularly into the issue of George Cottrell.
Right. Tristan says, Nigel Farage is the most consequential politician of our age. He has the courage to stand by his and the principles of his supporters. He has been persistently and continuously victimised in a way no other politician has. The tone of your coverage evidences the sheer hatred the establishment feels for him. Well, I can tell you, says Tristan, the people like him. And you have to say, Ollie, that that's exactly what Nigel Farage is banking on in terms of the forthcoming Clacton by-election.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the two possibilities that Nigel Farage might have had ahead of him, and it was, one, that the Standards investigation in 6 to sort of 8 months' time finds against him, and he's forced into a by-election on that merit once all of that is sort of out in the clear, cold light of day, or to go now and sort of say this is, being whipped up by the media and a bit of a frenzy, so I'm going to put it back in the hands of the public. And, you can be darn sure that work in Clacton, for reform will start in earnest. And you can also be sure that all the other parties will be trying to work out how best to sort of squeeze that vote out. Whether there are sort of unofficial electoral pacts in terms of sort of coalitions of anti-reform voters and that sort of thing to work out where it's going to go. And it sort of moves the story along a fair bit as well, doesn't it? Because we've now got Andy Burnham coming in as Prime Minister in the next couple of weeks, and instead that's going to be dominated by Nigel Farage. What was interesting, I thought, as well, about what Farage had to say was that, he in part said and dismissed the story that Gabriel Pogren and the Sunday Times put out on Sunday that said, he said several points of it were inaccurate. Now, it must be said that actually at no point has Nigel Farage laid out which bits are inaccurate. And actually on Sunday, Robert Jenrick was on some broadcast airwaves and pretty much stood up most of the story, as he was asked questions. So, it'll still be asking that question will still be following him around during the campaign trail. And during a campaign trail, he's got to be pretty public.
Well, I was going to say, and Terry mentioned this earlier, and Terry was wondering whether the by-election was unlikely precisely because he is now going to face all that scrutiny again with knobs on about all this money. It's not going to go away. It's going to be heightened. Yeah,
and you've also got, Anna Turley, the Labour Party chair, who has referred the issue of George Cottrell to the Electoral Commission today. They are carefully considering that, I understand. At the moment, they review everything that comes across their desk to see whether they need to investigate it under their remit. So they're looking at that. And, the idea that by simply running in a by-election, that changes who you are. Nigel Farage is still the leader of Reform UK. He is still a frontline politician. He is still a man hugely in the public eye. So it's not going to move any of the scrutiny away. He is just banking on the fact that what he is hearing in his backyard of Clacton, he can win on. Now, there is some precedent to this. David Davis resigned ages ago on a matter of principle from the Shadow Cabinet and resigned his seat altogether. Now, no one stood against him because they all thought it was a matter of principle over sort of freedom of speech and that sort of thing. And it took a long time and looked a bit of a farce by the end of it. Zach Goldsmith had to, force a by-election. I think that was after the Privileges Committee came after him, and he ended up losing his seat. So it is a massive gamble. I mean, Nigel Farage is a betting man, he is a gambling man, and this could be, a defining gamble for his career and the future of Reform UK.
What's this? Andy says, I do love the fact that somebody called Tristan is standing up for Farage. That says it all. Mike says, Nigel, I think, is a genius. No investigation now, and the questions of the donations are now null and void. Well, they're not, Mike, actually, as we've established. I think he's played the system. Good on him. Mark's got an interesting suggestion. Carol Vorderman as a possible candidate in the Clacton by-election.
Well, they count the votes pretty quickly, I imagine.
Yes, very good. Rob says, surely everybody sneering at Farage entirely makes his point that normal people feel unrepresented by the current political establishment. I'm not a fan, but calling a by-election is a masterstroke. Well, it may prove to be, but if he loses, what then, Terry?
Well, if he loses, then I guess it would be another end to Nigel Farage's political career. I mean, we were talking earlier before he started making the statement about, the number of times he has stepped away, walked away. In 2021, for instance, he said he was going to leave party politics for good. He resigned many times as leader of various parties. And even just now in the speech, he was saying, he was deciding what he could do. He could make money. He could go to the United States. He said, this is clearly an option that has occurred to him.
Yeah, and when he makes the point, when he asks the question, do we want leaders who've made money? Ollie, the emphasis on growth and the current government's frankly, rather lacklustre efforts in that area. That's not a bad question. Do we want leaders who've made money, know how to make money?
Well, there is that. I mean, Reform, you can tell from Nigel Farage's messaging over the last few weeks, have done a lot of work and have realised that among the Reform UK voter base, there are people for whom the cause of Reform UK in overthrowing, what is called the establishment, the two-party system of Labour and the Conservatives, seeing off Whitehall en masse, is a big enough campaign that actually Nigel Farage and whatever is reported about him is no barrier to that. They simply want to disrupt and then go from there. So they're aware that they've got a voter base that can be appealed to in that respect. In terms of the sort of making money point, it is a fair point. I thought it was interesting that at parts I thought Nigel Farage sounded a bit like he was essentially saying, I'm very rich and I can do what I like, and that's sort of, it's interesting as to how that comes across to a regular punter in the street. However, there is this question, it has been this question that the Tories have used against the Labour government as well, that how many people have run businesses who are around the Labour table. Now, there's a question of whether you can run a government. That is a totally separate issue, but for most of Reform's base, they don't think the government's been run well anyway. So that does strike at the sort of core of that messaging, and I think we're going to see that trotted out a fair bit across Clacton-on-Sea.
Yeah, I wonder whether one person who's enjoying the events of today, perhaps more than some others, is Sir Keir Starmer at the NATO summit in Ankara. I mean, it's the twilight of his premiership, but he wouldn't be human if he wasn't having a little thought to himself about Mr Burnham's in-tray. What do you think, Terry?
Yes, I mean, I always think these summits are probably quite a nice time for leaders to get away from their own domestic politics and compare notes with the only other people who probably understand exactly what it's like. But yes, you think having had that really difficult set of local election results that's ended up with the sort of snowball effect of you ending up resigning, you would sit back and say, well, it's not my problem anymore.
Right. Okay, exactly.
Except Keir Starmer's going to have to sit next to Donald Trump at some point because they're all sat alphabetically, and we know that Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social in the last 24 hours an article about how they're using Trump tactics against Farage. So I would be interested to see whether Donald Trump actually says something at a press conference while in Ankara.
Yeah, if you're just coming in from lunch, I mean, it is a beautiful summer's day. I just need to tell you that you're listening to Times Radio, and that the big news this afternoon is that Nigel Farage has resigned as the MP for Clacton. There will be a by-election in the seaside resort, which is probably having a lovely, lovely summer's afternoon as we speak, and Nigel Farage is going to stand. And he's casting that by-election, what was it, Terry, as the establishment versus...
The people versus the establishment, and telling the voters, in his words, if I win, you win.
Right, if I win, you win, which isn't so far from Andy Burnham's, what was his slogan in Makerfield? I mean, Burnham's the man who said he could see off reform, so maybe he should resign from Makerfield and stand in Clacton. Maybe that's what's going to happen.
I think there is a seriously interesting question here about what do the other parties do now. You know, it was the Conservatives who came second in Clacton at the last election. Labour were third. Do you then, pull your forces and do you decide we're going to stand one candidate from the party which is the most likely to win, or is it sort of politics as normal decides that we all need to put our name on the ballot paper in order just to show that we're there and to show willing?
Thanks for all the contact you're making with us this afternoon. Julie says, if Farage is so honourable, why doesn't he wait until after the investigation into his financial affairs and let his constituents decide then? But honestly, lots of people support Nigel Farage. DS says the media should be ashamed by how they've treated Nigel Farage. He won't be happy until he's added to the list of murdered MPs. Well, I mean, that's a really grim prospect, I've got to say. And if you don't mind, because you don't agree with his politics, I think that's sad. Is Farage doing this to avoid scrutiny by Parliament, says somebody else? Well, we've established that, in fact, the inquiry into his affairs will not go away. Roy says Farage's bluff should be called out. Other parties shouldn't stand candidates, don't give him the platform. Anonymous says, I'm sick of this. Farage is the establishment. Son of a stockbroker, public school education, lucrative job in the city, hobnobbing with billionaires and titled supporters, treats us like fools. Amir says, like him or you don't like him, Farage is showing more principles than fellow MPs who will do anything to keep their seats. By resigning and then standing again, in the by-election, Farage is putting all parties on an election footing and gives reform an opportunity to dominate the agenda over the summer, just at the time when the country is getting yet another unelected PM. Amir ends by saying, I think it's a smart move. Interesting. We're very grateful to all of you.